Raw Takes is back with me, Andrew Hoty. Hope everyone is doing swell. I'm glad to be back here with you guys. And we have a lot to talk about, from the Browns having Deshaun Watson gone for the rest of the year, Jameis Winston stepping up and having a big game on Sunday, Cleveland Cavaliers basketball tipping off, and now they're 4-0, undefeated, look like one of the best teams in the NBA. But are they really? We'll talk about that later on. Plus, we're going to wrap up the Guardians, the World Series, and much, much more here on Raw Takes with Andrew Hoty. Raw Takes with Andrew Hoty. Hope everyone is having a fantastic day. As always, like, subscribe, comment below, and check me out on social media. You can find me at Facebook, Raw Takes with Andrew Hoty. Twitter/X, you can find me at Hoty Andrew. And of course, on Instagram at Hoty Raw Takes. Hope everyone had a fantastic week and a half. I'm glad to be back here with you guys as we're going to be doing the show again on a much more consistent basis. So let's get right into those Cleveland Browns and the NFL as a whole from a standpoint. We'll start off with the Browns, obviously, being here in Cleveland. So, Jameis Winston steps up and has a huge game against the Baltimore Ravens on Sunday. He threw for over 300 yards passing. He wasn't that careful with the football. He didn't throw any interceptions, but there were two passes he threw that were very close to being interceptions, which makes me a little bit nervous for the future with him, and which is why I'm not overly optimistic about the Browns going into their game against the Chargers, but I'll get into that in a little bit. Jameis Winston still played much better than Deshaun Watson did in 7 games. Obviously, now the fans are going to start to warm up to him. I'm starting to warm up to him because I didn't love how Deshaun Watson was playing. And I'll just say, from the injury standpoint, when fans were booing Deshaun Watson off the field, I think the voices were meant as frustration to the Browns as a team for how Deshaun Watson was playing and the contract. I don't think it was necessarily his injury, but it still was wrong nevertheless. You don't boo when people are down like that. So I'm totally against it. It was just wrong timing, but I get the Browns fans' frustration. Other than that, Jameis Winston steps up. He makes big plays. We see Jerry Jeudy get the ball. We see Cedric Tillman have a great game. He looked like possibly an underrated wide receiver who's never been used before. And so Cedric Tillman had a big game. You look at other guys on the roster that had big games. David Njoku had some nice catches. The offensive line looked a little bit better, even with Jameis Winston under center. So now we're starting to have questions on, was it more so quarterback play or offensive line play? I still think the offensive line has a lot of holes. So that's possible. But other than that, it was a great all-around game by the Browns, and Kevin Stefanski's system worked. He stepped down from play calling, gave it to Ken Dorsey, and Ken Dorsey's offense worked with him being the play caller, which is possible because we did see Ken Dorsey have success with Josh Allen at a point. We know he's been fired, and Buffalo's offense has taken off ever since, but we did see a Ken Dorsey offense work at some point, and it definitely worked on Sunday. Kevin Stefanski making the right call to let Ken Dorsey call plays seems to absolutely be the right decision, and that's good for the Browns, and hopefully it ends up translating into more wins. But I just want to put my foot down on a few things. Why do we need to rebuild? The team was 1-6, had a rough start to the year. Why do we need to go out there and rebuild? Right now, the Browns have all the pieces in place, I think, to build themselves up to being a contender. They are stuck with the Deshaun Watson contract, which stinks. But heck, you have Jameis Winston on this roster. You have DTR, who's got kind of a similar playing style to him and Watson. I think the Browns should just stick with the quarterbacks they have and build upon what they have right now. I don't think we should just go out there and draft a quarterback and rebuild and start from scratch and trade everybody away at the deadline. No, Jameis Winston should not be traded. Let's have the Browns win as many games as possible. It's still plausible to think that this team could go 11-6 and make a playoff run. I'm not saying it's gonna happen because that will be very, very hard for the Browns to do. I still think the season is over, and I want to emphasize that. I don't think the Browns are going to the playoffs. But build upon what you have here. This is a good foundation. Kevin Stefanski is a darn good head coach. And there's been talks in Cleveland about, well, is Kevin Stefanski on the hot seat? He shouldn't be, A. And I don't think the fans have been criticizing Kevin Stefanski at all to a degree. I think they do somewhat still, because they always have as him being a play caller and all that. And that's part of why I think Ken Dorsey called plays. Clearly it looks like the right decision right now. But we shouldn't be that critical of Kevin Stefanski after what he did last year. And I think the Browns as an organization shouldn't be critical of Kevin Stefanski because of what he did last year too. Why? Why does Kevin Stefanski need to go? Stefanski's clearly not the problem. And all the talk about Kevin Stefanski, if he does get fired or if he does leave the Browns or anything like that, the talk is he's just going to go and get hired by somebody else. And that's absolutely right. He will. So why should we fire him after what he's done? Or move off him. And that's not just for the fans, it's also for the Browns as an organization. I think it's ridiculous to think about Kevin Stefanski being on the hot seat, especially because of what he did last year. This is a 2-time AP Coach of the Year, for crying out loud. It's ridiculous. And Ken Dorsey seems to have a good working offensive system right now with Jameis Winston under center and him calling plays. Let's see how this plays out. We still have 10 games to go on the schedule. The Browns still have an opportunity to make the playoffs. They could go 8-2 theoretically down this stretch and get a playoff berth. It's possible. Not saying it's going to happen. But they torched the Baltimore Ravens on Sunday. And I picked the Browns to win that game on another platform. I just thought the Browns were absolutely on fire from the fact that they had a new coordinator and a new quarterback. They would be absolutely on fire. And the reason that is because you don't have film on that. You don't have film on that. You don't have film on Ken Dorsey calling plays at all. You don't have film on Jameis Winston in a Browns uniform at all. Baltimore was preparing for the Browns of the past. They were preparing for a Deshaun Watson, Kevin Stefanski style offense, which wasn't working. That's what they had on film to prepare for. They didn't have on film to prepare for this Jameis Winston, Ken Dorsey style offense, as opposed to the Kevin Stefanski, Deshaun Watson offense, which wasn't working. So this ended up working out for the Browns. And now let's see what they do against the Chargers. Now I think because Jameis Winston has film on him, Jim Harbaugh, Justin Herbert, and everybody over in LA is going to be much better prepared for what they may see against the Browns this upcoming Sunday. And so that's why I struggle to say the Browns are going to end up winning this game. Because I think the Chargers are a good ball club right now. And I think they are definitely going to be a wild card team. They haven't necessarily beaten quality opponents yet, but I still think that's going to come within time. It's a new coach implementing a new system. No part of me really believes in the Denver Broncos with a rookie quarterback. Justin Herbert, I think, is the second best quarterback in that division, so I think the Chargers will end up showing that in strides throughout the rest of the season. And now with the Jets kind of in the tank, Jacksonville kind of in the tank, the Browns already in the tank. You look at Cincinnati. I mean, Cincinnati's been pretty much a no-show in a lot of the games they've played defensively especially. But that Eagles game was absolutely horrendous. And Joe Burrow made some comments saying, well, we could essentially win a bunch of games down the stretch here and everything will be fine. And that's the Joe Cool style way of doing things. But other than that, the Bengals have shown me no evidence that they're a good football team. So there is a lot of football left to be played, a lot of teams out there. Obviously, Baltimore is clearly flawed because of what we saw on Sunday. And that was a divisional game, too. Divisional games are always like that, especially with the Baltimore Ravens. But the Baltimore Ravens, on paper, were due to have a thud, and they did. And it was against the Browns. And I think they'll rebound from that. And the Baltimore Ravens, I still think, will end up winning this division down the line. The Pittsburgh Steelers, who have they really played that's been that quality yet? If you look at the back end of their schedule, they still have a lot of division games to be played. In fact, I don't think they've played a division game yet. I think they all come in November and December. So that's going to be huge for the Pittsburgh Steelers to have to rise to the occasion, especially because even though the Bengals' defense stinks, their offense is really good. And if you look at Baltimore, Baltimore is pretty much a total package outside of their pass defense. And if you look at Cleveland, that's still a tough opponent with Jameis Winston. The Browns are definitely going to be feisty in those two games. So the Pittsburgh Steelers have a lot of football to be played, and I still think they technically have the worst quarterback situation in the division. Some may argue the best. I just think Russell Wilson is not the Russell Wilson of old, and I think Justin Fields is still working on a few things. So I would take hands down Baltimore situation first and probably Cincinnati second, or you could actually reverse those because Joe Burrow's been to the Super Bowl. Joe Burrow and Lamar Jackson are the quarterback standards in the AFC North. As for the Browns, obviously Deshaun Watson being down and he wasn't really good this year, but I still think you look at Jameis Winston and possibly DTR as being guys that could step up and make some plays in good situations. DTR was kind of on a learning curve. He's still probably a good quality backup, but I think Jameis Winston does have qualities to be a possible good starter in the NFL. So I'm excited to see what the Browns do moving forward. I'm excited to see what the rest of the NFL does. Obviously, if you look at the Steelers' offense kind of coming to life yesterday late in that game against the New York Giants, the New York Giants really just looked like a mess anyway. I mean, wow. It's possible that the Steelers just kind of got an easy break with how the schedule opened up. So we'll see what takes place. There's still a lot of football to be played. Kansas City's still a juggernaut. You look at the other teams in the AFC like Buffalo, they're on a really good trajectory right now. I still think Houston might be the second seed, and everyone's kind of been quiet about them. And then, of course, you look at the NFC. The Detroit Lions right now are the number one seed of the NFC, by the way. Who would have ever thought we'd be saying that? But the Detroit Lions are really darn good. They play Green Bay this week, and Green Bay looks really darn good. I don't believe in the Bears. I know they have a winning record right now, and especially because of what Washington did to them on that Hail Mary. The Washington Commanders, I'm starting to believe, are the real deal. Philadelphia's feisty. They're still fighting for it, but they haven't played the Commanders yet. I wonder how that matchup's going to turn up down the line. The Dallas Cowboys are clearly a joke. and the New York Giants are a joke in that division. You look at the NFC South, Atlanta's clearly in the driver's seat now because they swept the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I think that's going to be huge for Atlanta to make a playoff berth at some point because they clearly look like the best team in that division, especially because the Saints lost Derek Carr, and they haven't been the same since. And you look at the Buccaneers, they lost Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. Baker Mayfield still actually playing very well. I don't think people should criticize Baker Mayfield too much for how he's playing in Tampa Bay right now without his two best weapons. But the Buccaneers are definitely kind of a shell of themselves, and they're going to have to figure some things out. But I still like them to be a probable wild card team. And Carolina's Carolina. They're terrible. The Minnesota Vikings have come down to earth a little bit, too, if we talk about NFC North teams. I don't buy the Vikings hype, as I've said numerous times. I think they're going to start to slowly unwind as Detroit and Green Bay start to take off. I still think it's Detroit's division to lose, honestly. Detroit looks like the best team in the NFC. And then you look at the West, too. Seattle, probably not very good. San Francisco's figuring things out, so they're probably the best team in that division. But hey, I'm not sleeping on the Rams at 3-4 either. They had some injuries to open the year. They had some thud games. I think they can come back into this thing. And Arizona's feisty. We saw that game against the Dolphins, how feisty they could be. So the NFL as a whole right now are really, really competitive. And we still have a good 10, 11 games to go for most of the teams playing. Maybe 9. I know some teams haven't had bye weeks yet. But we still have a good average about 10 games to play for every single team in the NFL right now. There's a lot of football to be played, and there's a lot of time for teams to prove who's good, who's bad, who could be feisty, who's going to miss the playoffs, who's going to be on the edge of a playoff berth. A lot could go on within the next 10-game sample size that we have in the National Football League, and I'm excited to see what takes place. Let's talk a little bit now about the Cleveland Cavaliers in the NBA. So, the Cavaliers have opened up. They're undefeated. They're 4-0. The first 3 opponents, relatively easy. You look at the Washington Wizards, obviously an easy opponent. The Detroit Pistons, pretty easy as well, in the Toronto Raptors. Those were your 3 wins, and you look at the 136-106 win. The offense is starting to come to life. Kenny Atkinson is an offensive-minded coach. Evan Mobley went off one game. Darius Garland went off against the Knicks yesterday, and I didn't even talk about the Knicks game yet, and we're pretty sure that the Knicks are a quality opponent right now. So the Cavaliers on all cylinders look like a great NBA basketball team right now, and they're undefeated. With that being said, though, I still don't think the Cavaliers are a finals contender yet. They still have a lot to prove. I think this is going to be a great regular season team. I'm not so sure I'm ready to say this team's going to get out of the second round. I think offensively they're going to figure some more things out. Obviously, we know how glued Kobe Altman is to the core 4 and how they're built to play basketball. And we can see that the core 4 can do a lot of great things together. Right now, if I were to pick the end of the season standings, I would probably say the Boston Celtics are the best team in the Eastern Conference, and the Cleveland Cavaliers are second. The Cavaliers are about to play the Lakers, who are red hot with LeBron James coming off what he's doing so far to open the year. But I don't really believe in the Lakers long term. I would say the Cavs at home should probably win that game and start off 5-0. I really think that the Cavs are that good to be a great regular season basketball team. In the postseason, I just question how they're going to compete with the teams like Boston. I'm going to throw Milwaukee in there. Milwaukee looks like a mess. I know they're 1-3 to open the year. But I think at some point they're going to fire Doc Rivers, as they should, for what they did to Adrian Griffin last year. One of the most ridiculous moves in history the Milwaukee Bucks made by hiring Doc Rivers, who was just a mess of a basketball coach anymore. So I think at some point Doc Rivers is going to be gone from Milwaukee. The Bucks are going to start to take off, and they're going to be a contender. I think Orlando is the real deal. I think they got better. I'm not sure that they're better than the Cleveland Cavaliers because we beat them in a playoff series. But the Orlando Magic I'm taking seriously. I look at the Indiana Pacers, obviously kind of a shaky start to the year for them too. But Indiana, honestly, long-term should be just fine, and they're very well coached with Rick Carlisle. And you also look at a team like the New York Knicks, and the New York Knicks have had the Cavs number the last couple of seasons. So I think the New York Knicks are probably better than the Cleveland Cavaliers, but last night they showed it. The Cavs went to New York, they went to Madison Square Garden in a hostile environment typically for the Cleveland Cavaliers, and they went and they won a big game. And that's exactly what you want to see from the Cavs. All that being said, though, leads me to believe this is a really good regular season team. As I were to pick right now, I'd say this is a second round out in the postseason. I still think they need another star to get themselves above everything. And they have the assets to do it. I think the Cavs are going to be really well coached with Kenny Atkinson, offensively minded. I still think J.B. Bickerstaff did a really good job, but I think a lot of people know that maybe there was just that ceiling for J.B., and it was time to go out there and get a guy like Kenny Atkinson going. Because the offense really needed to be tapped in. Evan Mobley needed to develop. We want Evan Mobley to be an all-star this year. And this team could have 4 all-stars. If you look at the way Donovan Mitchell plays basketball, Jared Allen plays basketball, who's a great defender and can be great offensively, and he gets boards. That's the big thing about Jared Allen. You look at Darius Garland. Darius Garland has so much untapped potential, and he just needs to stay consistent. He was awful last year. Bad year for Darius Garland. He needs to be a lot better this year, and I think with Kenny Atkinson, he could tap into that potential. And Evan Mobley, tapping into him and getting him going because we know how good of a defensive player he is. The Cleveland Cavaliers are going to be a tough out for a lot of teams to play. And I look at teams in the Eastern Conference. Outside of Boston, I could see the Cleveland Cavaliers really competing with all these teams right now. And I'll even throw Miami in there because Miami with Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo, I mean, they usually don't take the regular season that much seriously in the last couple seasons. And then they come up in the playoffs and have some big games. And Eric Spoelstra, obviously being Eric Spoelstra. The Pittsburgh Steelers, as I heard one time someone compare the Miami Heat to. I think that's a great comparison because they have that Miami Heat-style culture and the way they do things. And so the Miami Heat are definitely in the conversation, too, for being competitive this year. I don't want to leave them out because they're always a tough out. So, yeah, the Cleveland Cavaliers, I think, are in prime position to be one of the best regular season teams in basketball. But I still have my doubts in the postseason, and there's still a lot of basketball to be played. Who knows what's going to happen? At some point, the Cavs are going to be in a stretch where they probably win 4 of 10 games, or 3 of 10 games. Like, there's going to be poor stretches this season for the Cleveland Cavaliers, and it's going to be how do they overcome them and move on. But this is still going to be a great regular season basketball team. Obviously, you look at the Western Conference. Denver looks like a shell of themselves to some degree opening the year. Do we really believe that? We think Oklahoma City is going to be really good again with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander along with Chet Holmgren. You look at a team like the Los Angeles Lakers. I think a lot of people are taking them seriously. I really am not either. The Lakers are kind of just the LeBron show right now for his last few years in the league. So I can't really take the Lakers seriously. The Pelicans going to be good with Zion healthy or Zion not healthy. Pelicans do put up some pretty good numbers with both of those factors, but obviously Zion being on the court is a huge thing for New Orleans, but they've kind of been a mess the last few years since they drafted Zion, you could even say. The Memphis Grizzlies look like they're back. Ja Morant is really good, and I think the Memphis Grizzlies are back, so it's going to be interesting to see how the Grizzlies play. Golden State now with no Klay Thompson. Is Steph Curry going to lead Golden State on a massive run? I don't think Golden State's the Golden State of old. Dallas and the Mavericks. I mean, the Mavericks have been really, really good the last couple seasons and made some pretty good playoff runs with Luka Doncic. I mean, it's possible to see the Dallas Mavericks possibly getting back to the finals, but I'm not so sure. And with Klay Thompson there, it helps them out, I think, a little bit, but Dallas is not the same Dallas. And I'm not as hyped on San Antonio as a lot of people may be. I think you're going to have a nice season and win maybe 40-some games, but no, I don't think the San Antonio Spurs are any real threat in terms of the NBA postseason. I'd even say 30-some games. I'm not really sold on the Spurs at all. With an older Chris Paul, who will be great for a guy like Victor Wembanyama, by the way, who's still as young as he is. But the Spurs are still kind of in a tough position, and they're essentially still rebuilding. So they're going to have a long stretch to go in San Antonio. But with that being said, the NBA definitely looks very competitive this year, and I'm excited to see what happens. And my Cleveland Cavaliers, they're on a roll. They're on a roll, and the core 4 looks great right now. And Dean Wade has even stepped it up, too. You might even say core 5. He's played better than Max Strus did all year, I think, in these last couple games. So I'm excited to see if we end up keeping Max Strus in the starting 5 or if we end up bringing him off the bench, because I think Dean Wade's done a terrific job for the Cavaliers to open the year. All right. The Guardians, and we're just going to wrap up the season as a whole. The season was not a failure. I want to emphasize that. The Guardians did a terrific job of going on a deeper playoff run than anyone would have expected. The team wasn't even expected to make the playoffs, and they ended up in the ALCS. Lane Thomas had a fantastic postseason. I said a lot of bad things about Lane Thomas when we made the trade. I was for the trade, but he was so bad those first couple weeks with us, and he ended up flipping it and turning it around, and he was very productive to end the year, especially off the Grand Slam. You look at the double he had in Game 3 that set up the John Kenzie Noel special home run in the ALCS. They were outclassed, outmanaged in every way, shape, or form. I actually blame probably Stephen Vogt as the biggest culprit for losing the ALCS. And Jose Ramirez for being a no-show, and Josh Naylor swinging at a lot of pitches he shouldn't. So there was a lot of problems in the ALCS, but where does this team go from here is now going to be the question. Shane Bieber is likely going to be healthy next year at some point, and I think the Guardians are going to be able to re-sign Shane Bieber, bring him back on board, and he could be an ace pitcher again. I think Shane Bieber, based on what he showed us last year with how he shut down teams in the 2 games we saw him pitch in before he was done for the year. I think that's going to be tremendous for the Guardians with already a really good bullpen. And you look at Cade Smith, you look at Hunter Gaddis, you look at Emmanuel Clase, you're still pretty much set there. And I know Emmanuel Clase had a shaky postseason. I still think Emmanuel Clase is going to be a great closer moving forward, and you don't have much to worry about there. I think he comes back with some vengeance. We saw that even in the ALCS. In Game 5, he was shaken up in Games 3 and 4, and he came back out there, and he got Aaron Judge and Giancarlo Stanton out. So I'm still sold on Emmanuel Clase long term. You look at the lineup, you have a great leadoff in Stephen Kwan. You have Jose as your slugger in the 3rd hole, Josh Naylor in the 4th. I think long term there's going to be questions about affording Josh Naylor. What do you do now with Brian Rocchio because he showed some great postseason numbers? I think Brian Rocchio is your shortstop of the future. I think eventually what the Guardians should look at doing is trading Andres Gimenez. And even though Gimenez has a big contract and he hasn't been the same guy the Guardians thought he would be offensively, I think if you look at Andres Gimenez and how he plays defense, there's going to be a team out there that needs a second baseman. Eventually you're going to bring Travis Bazzana up, probably not next year, but at some point you bring up Travis Bazzana and you get him going with the Guardians, and that's going to be your future second baseman with Brian Rocchio at shortstop. I think you also look at David Fry still being a great utility player. I don't know if David Fry can continue sustained success like he had this year. He obviously performed in the postseason, but David Fry is still a guy I want to have batting 5th or 6th in the lineup in a regular season. I think David Fry could be that guy. And I also think you're going to have to look at signing another big-name bat. Now, knowing the Guardians' history, they do things cheap, but they're on the brink of a World Series. Can we see them spend just a little bit more money to possibly break through and win this division? And a division that's not getting easier, by the way. Kansas City has shown they're the real deal, with Bobby Witt Jr. being their headline offensively. The Detroit Tigers, obviously with Tarek Skubal, that's their mound guy. That's the Cy Young winner likely here soon. I mean, Tarek Skubal's going to be there, and the Detroit Tigers are going to be the real deal, and you're going to have to fight them off. You beat a playoff series with them, but they're going to get better, I think. You look at the Minnesota Twins. Yeah, they were shaky this year, but I still think the Minnesota Twins are a relatively good organization that spends a lot of money. I think they'll find ways to get back to being competitive next year. You don't have to worry about the White Sox, but this division is going to be more competitive than what it was. So for the Guardians to come out of the AL Central this year, this offseason, they have to look at signing another big bat. If you want to compete with the Aaron Judges and the Giancarlo Stantons, and the Juan Sotos, and obviously Juan Soto and Aaron Judge, if you look at the World Series and the series against Kansas City, they haven't been the same kind of batters that they were in the Guardians series. And Giancarlo Stanton has been in the postseason the whole time, so credit goes to him for the Yankees and the postseason run they've had. But now they're on the brink of possibly getting swept, looking at what Freddie Freeman is doing to them, let alone anybody else on the Dodgers lineup. But you look at the fact that the Guardians are just this close to possibly getting to a World Series this year, leads me to be optimistic for the future that this team's going to be competitive year in and year out. And with a guy like Chris Antonetti, who is hands down one of the best executives in baseball, probably one of the most underrated executives in baseball, he's going to be able to figure this thing out. But you're going to need another bat. Who's that bat going to be? I don't know. And can the Guardians go out there and find it and just spend maybe a little bit more cash to do so? With how ticket sales went this year and how the fans showed up for this baseball team, got us to be ranked one of the top baseball cities in the country. Absolutely. You got to go out there and do it. And if I'm the Guardians, you better do it. Because if you want fans to continue to show up and show out like they do, you have to show up and you have to get a bat. Hands down, the front office has to go get a bat. Ownership has to give them a little bit more pay to go out there, get a bat, get this lineup going. This team could possibly win 100 games next year based on everything I saw this year. And I didn't even mention Lane Thomas being in the future lineup. It's possible that he stays around. But this is too cheap of a lineup right now to go win a World Series and compete against the New York Yankees, let alone the LA Dodgers, when postseason crunch time comes to begin. And it's always, the Yankees, Dodgers, big markets, all that. We could talk about why baseball needs a salary cap all day long. I'm all for it because it'll help all these juggernauts get worse over time, and then they have to rebuild. As well, a lot of these other teams, they're kind of just stuck in the middle all the time, and that's kind of where the Guardians are right now. They're stuck in the middle. They're really good, but they never cross the hump. And they need to do that. It's time for the Guardians to go sign a bat, get this lineup going, and maybe look for another pitcher, because Alex Cobb probably isn't going to be your guy next year. Matt Boyd, yes. I'm sold on Matt Boyd. Tanner Bybee, yes. Gavin Williams, long term. I think you got a guy there. That's 3-4 pitchers alone, and then you look at Shane Bieber if he comes back. So, yes, the Guardians need to go get a bat. That needs to be the priority of this offseason. And if they get a cheap bat, but a bat that can produce and get you home runs, and maybe you could add into the 5 or 6 slot with Josh Naylor slugging, with Jose Ramirez slugging, and you have Steven Kwan as a great leadoff hitter. This could be a really, really good baseball team for years to come, and I'm excited to see what they do. To wrap up the show, I'll briefly talk about Ohio State and their flawed win against Nebraska. Nebraska got blown out by Indiana the week before. You could argue that the Buckeyes were looking ahead to the Penn State game this upcoming weekend. I am very nervous about the Buckeyes right now. I think it's possible they lose 3 games this year. I know a lot of people may think, Andrew, what are you talking about? It's possible because Indiana destroyed Nebraska, and we still got to play Indiana, let alone Penn State. I'm nervous about the Buckeyes to play Penn State and win that game. And if they lose that game, I'm not so sure I like them to compete with Indiana. And then it goes all the way down to the Michigan game, which would still make me nervous. Ryan Day has ruined this program. You have great players out there like Quinshon Judkins, like Trevion Henderson, like Will Howard, who's proven to be a pretty good quarterback so far for the Buckeyes on offense. And then you look at the defense. Obviously, Denzel Burke had a pretty bad game against Oregon, but Denzel Burke is still a great secondary player. So, to me, the Buckeyes program right now is a shell of itself. And you look at how college football ranks right now. You look at Oregon being the number 1 team. Oregon's the real deal. Penn State hasn't lost yet. Maybe they lose this upcoming Saturday to the Buckeyes. They've played in a lot of close games, so they're definitely flawed. You look at Texas losing a game to Georgia. You look at Alabama essentially being on the outside looking in. Michigan's not even ranked right now. I mean, the college football field right now, especially with the 12-team playoff format that's upcoming, looks very good for any college program to just step up and make a statement. I would still probably say on paper right now, Georgia may be my favorite, maybe Oregon, because Oregon's really well coached. I don't think Oregon is as talented as the Buckeyes, but Dan Lanning is one hell of a football coach, and he's doing a terrific job with the Oregon Ducks. So there is a lot of breathing room here for this field of college football teams in the Ohio State Buckeyes. You might have some 2-loss teams in the playoffs. You could be a 2-loss team yourself and still make the playoffs. Indiana might make the playoffs. They're, I think, ranked 13 last I checked. They might be a little higher now. But there is a lot of breathing room for the Buckeyes. They just got to go out there, take care of business against Penn State. Hopefully the Nebraska game was overlooking to Penn State, because that was unacceptable, the way they won that game, 21-17. Matt Rule and the Nebraska Cornhuskers had you on the ropes the whole time. That's coaching. Ryan Day is clearly the problem with Ohio State, and that's why I'm hesitant to say the Buckeyes are going to be some world-class program this year. They have to get it together, or else Ryan Day's got to go. That's it for today's edition of Raw Takes with Andrew Hoty. I'll be back later this week for more of my thoughts on sports, so make sure to stick around for that. Like, subscribe, comment below, and check me out on social media. Hope everyone has a great rest of your day, and we'll see you later this week. Take it easy, everybody.